Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Alright, so the Bergson bandwagon continues. We're looking today at the difference between science and philosophy, and then we'll break down the difference between modern and ancient science, according to Bergson here. So let's start with science. So the first thing Bergson says about science is that it conceives only parts without concerning itself with the movements between these parts, which is exactly what duration deals with. That's the metaphysical underpinnings of reality. So it's kind of, we've talked about this kind of thing before, right? That analytical approach, breaking things down into parts, breaking those parts further down into other parts. That's how science progresses. That's what science does. But it always looks at these stopping points. It doesn't get to what's in between the stopping points. And the method that it uses to try and do that, because it's not that it doesn't try, it's that the method is guaranteed to never find what's in between any two particular stopping points, because it always ends up looking for just a third stopping point. You know, we're just drilling down deeper and deeper, finding more smaller parts. But then we never get to what's in between the parts. And you can't get that by drilling deeper. That's the problem. So the approach of science is good for what it is, but it doesn't get us to the movement in between these parts. It doesn't get us to how these parts change. You can't access movement, you can't access change, and you can't access, or you can't see duration, right? Because all you see are the moments, individual instants in the timeline, rather than seeing what goes into what it is that's in between two different instants. And the only way to do that is to not drill deeper, but to kind of step back a little bit, you have to take a completely different approach. And that's what philosophy is. That's what duration is. We'll come back to that in a moment. But interestingly enough, if you take that approach, concerning yourself only with parts rather than the movements or the change between the parts, you find that then there's no genuine understanding of evolution, which means there's no understanding of life. And that is what Bergson says about science. It fundamentally cannot understand life, whereas his metaphysics, his duration, is exactly tailored to understanding life, because it looks directly at life. It looks directly at the change, at the continuity, rather than the discrete points. Which isn't to say, of course, that evolution, the theory of evolution, is wrong. We'll come back, we'll revisit this in a couple of videos and look at that in quite a bit of detail. But the idea is that the theory of evolution, as great as it is and as correct as it is, it doesn't explain the process of life transforming itself through these different stages. All it does is give us snapshots at different points in Earth's timeline. And putting snapshots of an object side by side will never reproduce the object itself, or the process, whatever it is you're trying to capture. No matter how many photos you get, that's the thing. Science is just looking for more photos, right? Let's see if we can get deeper, take better resolution photos, higher resolution, higher quality. We'll have more photos, that'll give us a proper explanation. It won't. It'll let you do things that you can't do now, but it won't give you an explanation of the thing you're looking for. It's kind of like the way, it's maybe a little bit different, but I've thought about this before, the way that neuroscience tries to understand consciousness by drilling deeper and deeper, as if consciousness is going to be somewhere, the secrets of consciousness are going to be somewhere deep in the atomic structure of the brain or something, or the subatomic structure, even the quantum nature of the brain. I mean, that's just going in the wrong direction, right? You're not going to understand consciousness by tearing apart the thing that is conscious to trying to find smaller pieces. So yeah, putting photos of an object like that side by side will never give you the object itself. You have to kind of step back to get that picture. This approach is pure spatiality, and science follows this approach. That is to say, it follows matter in this direction, away from duration, away from change, away from genuine movement. So we're getting kind of moving in the opposite direction if what we're looking for is a complete understanding of reality, of the object. And that's fine, actually. There's nothing wrong with that, because the purpose of science isn't to show us the essence of things, but to furnish us with the best means of acting on them. And that's really important, because this is the exact opposite of what we normally think of science, right? This in our day and age, science is, it's the touchstone for all of our knowledge, right? It's what we look to tell us precisely what things are. But this is what Bergson's saying, is it doesn't show us the essence of things. It can't show us the essence of things, because it's just taking snapshots of it. These snapshots let us manipulate the thing. They let us use the thing. They let us achieve our practical goals ever more efficiently, more effectively. But they don't tell us what the thing is. And that's a really important insight, I think. Science is purely practical in nature. It's utilitarian. That's its goal. That's its focus. If you're looking to science to explain the thing, then you're going to come up short. But if you're looking at science in the correct way, I think the way that you should look at science, its domain of inquiry is not to tell us what things are, but to tell us how best to use them, to show us ways of manipulating things in order to achieve our desired outcomes. So it's highly practical. That's its focus. That's its raison d'etre. And this is accomplished through signs. So it takes those signs, which it substitutes for the objects themselves. And obviously we're talking about math here. So we take away the things themselves and substitute them we take away the things, the objects, substitute them with numbers, with algebra, right, with variables, put them into these equations, which we can then manipulate, and we can find new ways of dealing with the objects. But we're not dealing with the objects themselves anymore. That's the key point. That's what science does. It takes our focus away from the objects and onto models. And the models, again, highly useful, highly practical, but not telling us anything about the thing itself. And obviously it's obviously true. If you're looking at the model, you're not looking at the thing. And we're in a situation now, in fact, where the models are more important, I think, to physicists than the things themselves. And so, we're getting some physicists are getting kind of, it seems a bit condescending to say, but getting kind of carried away with the models and thinking or suggesting that reality is mathematical. Reality is mathematics, not just quantitative, not just that we can describe reality with maths, but that it's actually mathematical at its core, whatever that could mean. To me, that's just this it's the extreme of taking the model instead of the thing itself. But yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what science does. Uses these signs, which it substitutes for the objects, and it's more precise and efficient than language for sure, but it still arrests reality under a definite form, which means that we're still treating reality as a collection of things, a collection of fixed static objects, and that will never get us to an understanding of the whole, because the whole is what's in between those parts. That's the majority of what is important in the whole, not the things themselves. Like an atom, what's important in the atom is what, 95%, 99% empty space. You can't understand reality if you don't have a conception of that space in between the particles. That's just an analogy, but that's what Bergson's saying. You can't understand reality if all you're looking at are the broken parts of it, if you have no sense of what holds them together. But because of therefore, science always proceeds by leaps, from situation to situation, from arrangement to rearrangement. Science may consider rearrangements that come closer and closer to each other. It may thus increase the number of moments that it isolates, but it always isolates moments. As to what happens in the interval between the moments, science is no more concerned with that than are our common intelligence, our senses, and our language. It does not bear on the interval, but only on the extremities. And again, that's just that point, missing the gaps. We're missing the space in between the fixed things. We're missing the duration, which connects, which is like the lifeblood of the things themselves, objects, positions, instants, and time. And unless you understand that, you'll never have an understanding of the whole. And this is just exactly what Bergson's cinematographical method is. We've looked at that. We looked at that in a prior video. So that's science. Let's have a look at philosophy then. Okay, so science follows matter in the direction of spatiality, in the direction of space. Philosophy, on the other hand, is an attempt to remount this incline and return to the origin. So kind of moving in the opposite direction of science. Instead of getting smaller and smaller, analyzing the thing into parts, we want to step back so we can understand the whole thing. And the way we do this is to follow intuition. The method behind this is intuition, which I think I've used this quote before, but I'll throw it up again. Philosophizing consists in placing oneself within the object itself by an effort of intuition. And all that means, remember, is thinking in terms of duration, thinking in terms of change, continuity, mobility, instead of the analytic approach, breaking things down into parts. We want to preserve the changes, the gaps in between those parts, because that's where we'll get an understanding of the whole. As soon as we kind of isolate parts of the whole, then we're obviously, a priori, we're already cutting off parts of the whole. So how can we possibly understand the whole? The only way we can do that is if we step back and have an intuitive grasp of the whole itself. And again, intuitive not meaning, some kind of sense or feeling of the whole or whatever, but a strong, rigorous reflection on the whole, thinking about the whole in terms of duration. So yeah, like I said, it's concerned with the organization of the whole before it is decomposed into parts. I just wanted to mention this. The quote just triggered a memory of Merleau-Ponty's, a criticism of Merleau-Ponty's that I've just read. Just read The Visible and the Invisible, and he criticizes Bergson in there specifically for kind of merging the two, merging the subject and the object. He thinks that we'll never come to an understanding of reality if we've merged those two together. Then we lose something fundamental. If we merge the subject and the object, there is no subject or object anymore, which means that you've lost any kind of self-awareness or any sense that there is an object in the first place. And it's if you were to read this quote without perhaps knowing anything about Bergson, philosophizing consists in placing oneself within the object itself. You could be forgiven for jumping to that conclusion, but that's completely wrong, right? That's not at all what Bergson was saying. He wasn't saying to understand reality we have to dispense with the subject-object dichotomy. We have to kind of merge the subject and the object together. He's saying that in order to understand the object, we have to place ourselves by an act of imagination within the object, thinking in terms of duration, thinking in terms of change, continuity, mobility. So it's not kind of like, it's not a metaphysical. Bergson's not making a metaphysical claim, I guess, that there is no subject and object. He's saying, though, to understand the thing, we have to follow a different method than we do, than the sciences do, which is their method of dissection and analysis. He's not saying that subject and object don't exist. And I think the difference in approach between Merleau-Ponty and Bergson is more the phenomenological, metaphysical distinction. But I just read it in just a couple of days ago, and I just think it's a kind of an unfair criticism of Bergson to suggest that intuitionism is this attempt to blend the subject and the object together. It's not really. That's not behind the metaphysics of Bergson. That's the method we use to understand the thing. Imagine ourselves in the object, imagine ourselves in the object in terms of duration, in terms of change, keeping those concepts alive. And that's very much what Merleau-Ponty does, right? He very much does that. He keeps so there's so much in Merleau-Ponty that I read, and it's just, I'm just thrown right back into Bergson every time. But yeah, the criticism I think that he launched at Bergson, I think it misses the mark. It misses the mark for me anyway. I don't think it's a fair criticism, and doubly so considering that so much of his thought finds precedent in Bergson. So yeah, there are too many parallels for me to let Merleau-Ponty's criticism of Bergson kind of go without me saying anything about it. Anyway, that's a little side note. So basically, that's what philosophy is. It's this return to the origin. It's this attempt to rethink reality as a whole, rather than as broken up into parts. An attempt to rethink reality as it is, rather than as it is in relation to our goals, in relation to our practical aims. So he asks at one point, then shouldn't we just leave matter to physics and chemistry, and life to biology and psychology? Philosophy then should take the results of those and attempt to reach deeper conclusions, attempt to work with the already established scientific theories? Wouldn't that be the best approach? And the answer is no. And the reason is because science it's already built on metaphysical presuppositions. And that is so important. I think the scientists often tend to think that what they're doing is like they're examining the ground itself, the ground of reality, but they're not. They're not examining kind of a presuppositionless ground. Their whole endeavor is precisely based on a metaphysical assumption. Namely, there are a couple that come to mind. The mechanistic approach, so that things, living matter, like non-living matter, is inert, and it can be adequately and completely described through a third-person perspective, through mechanical laws, right? That's a mechanistic presupposition that the science is built on. Another one is materialism. Obviously, that's a big assumption as well, that everything's reducible to matter, that there's nothing else going on, that a complete material description of the universe is in fact a complete description of the universe, a complete description of everything that's going on. So these presuppositions are built into science, and which means that it's already taken its first step from philosophy, from a philosophical grounding. So it's going to be no good for philosophy to come along then and say, well, we'll leave that to you, we'll take what you find and then we'll work with it, because there are already philosophical presuppositions in science. And that's a really important point, and one that tends to be overlooked or dismissed, I think, these days in our objective age, where we think that pure objectivity is the same as having no presuppositions. We think that is kind of the ground floor from which we should, a presuppositionless ground floor from which we can start our investigation. But like I say, there are presuppositions hidden in the grounding of science. So science applies its technique of partitioning to life, because it works so well in the inert realm. So it works so well for us in the stuff that's not alive. Let's use it for the things that are alive as well and see what we get. But the problem is that there, in the inert realm, it reflected our practical goals. So already when we're describing things, we're describing them in relation to ourselves and to the things that we want to do. It already comes under this banner of practice, of utility. Philosophy, on the other hand, is analyzing life with the same methods also makes it appear relative to practice, also makes it appear in conjunction with and in relation to our practical goals. Philosophy, however, and this is a phrase that Bergson uses quite a lot, is disinterested speculation. So it's stepping back from the goals that we have. It's analysing things. It's not analysing things. It's taking the world, taking the objects as they are in themselves, not related to our practical goals. So it advocates turning this attention aside from the part of the universe which interests us from a practical viewpoint and turning it back toward what serves no practical purpose. And the things that serve a practical purpose are the static chunks, the things that we've already dissected, this continuity, this the totality into. Those are the things that interest us, the objects, the static objects, not the things in between, not the change in between those objects, not the movement in between the object from one place to another. We're only interested in what the thing is like when it gets to its destination, because then I can use it. While it's in flow, in flux, it's unusable. It's only usable if it's a concrete thing, a static thing, at a certain point, in a certain place, at a certain time. So we're already removing the thing from the whole in which it's contained. So that's really nice. Philosophy's disinterested speculation, focusing again on the gaps in between the things. And not so much related, but this will come up later if I ever get to the end of this series. Bergson says that science can give us well-being. Philosophy, however, can give us joy. And we'll see if we can flesh that out in a few videos' time. But yeah, science can satisfy our practical needs. It can make our lives comfortable, convenient. But it's only philosophy that can give us true joy. And like I say, I'll explain what that means in more detail later. So the last section of today's video, we're going to look at the difference between modern and ancient science. All right, so modern versus ancient science, which basically means ancient Greece. The first thing Bergson says is the difference is not experiment, as we typically tend to think. And he points to Archimedes, who was conducting experiments way back before anybody had the faintest notion of the scientific method. Heidegger says exactly the same thing, by the way, if you're interested in that. Rather, Bergson says that the difference was modern science resolves genera into laws. So we're focusing on relations between static parts of becoming, instead of resolving laws to genera. For example, the way that Aristotle thought that stones fell to the earth because it's the nature of the genus stone to move towards the ground. So that's kind of a broad distinction between the two, modern and ancient science. Ancient science thinks it knows its objects sufficiently when it has noted of it some privileged moments, whereas modern science considers the object at any moment whatever. And then that's the essential distinction there. The stone kind of at rest, at home, if you like. That's the privileged moment. That's where it's trying to get to. That's what ancient science turned on. That's how it kind of viewed the world. Whereas for modern science, it's the stone at any time. No time is privileged. No moment is privileged. We're looking at considering the object at any moment. And this leads us to the main difference. Well, that is the main difference, but just drilling down on that, the key feature between those two is the conception of time that lies underneath them. So I'll give you a quote, kind of a long quote for this one. Our physics differs from that of the ancients chiefly in the indefinite breaking up of time. For the ancients, time comprised as many undivided periods as our natural perception and our language cut out in it successive facts, each presenting a kind of individuality. Time is always supposed to be divided into determinate periods, and the mode of division to be forced on the mind by apparent crises of the real. For a Kepler or a Galileo, on the contrary, time is not divided objectively in one way or another, by the matter that fills it. It has no natural articulations. We ought to divide it as we please. All moments count. None of them has the right to set itself up as a moment that represents or dominates the others. And that's pretty much it. That's the key distinction between the two. And there's a sense in which we can note that the goal of ancient science was qualitative. The goal was to understand the thing itself, understand the genus, what it means for a stone to be a stone, when a stone is completely and fully stone-like, looking for that, but focusing on the object, trying to understand the thing itself, as opposed to modern science, which is primarily quantitative. The goal is to measure, to count, to analyze. But this doesn't mean that the ancients were any closer to Bergson's conception of time, because in kind of an ironic twist, it's the other way around. Ancient science was static. There was no time for them because everything was studied in natural blocks. They studied things according to the way that we naturally break them up. They're naturally broken up by our perceptions. Hence, things like stone, earth, fire, these kind of natural, these ways of naturally breaking up the world that accord with our natural human senses. So they were completely static in their approach. Time had no relevance. Whereas for modern science, time is central, time is key, which is to say quantitative relations are true for any time. But again, that time is kind of at the heart of modern science. And the difference then is that modern science relates everything back to time, treating it as an individual variable in itself. So it's important in a way that it wasn't for ancient science. But the question for Bergson is, what time are we talking about here? And the answer is that the time of science is not duration. Rather, it's time articulated by moments. And so that's how modern science conceives of time. It brings time into the picture, but it brings in a spatialized sense of time. Time articulated by moments, which we can always break into smaller moments. Break time down into a day, 24 hours. Break it up into 24 hours. Break an hour up into minutes, minutes into seconds, seconds into... You get how it goes, and it doesn't end. So time then is a series of moments, these small virtual stopping places, Bergson calls them. Therefore, the time of modern science is immobile. There's no mobility in it. There's no flux. There's no duration. Time is conceived of as little virtual stopping points, which for sure between two stopping points we can drill down and get a third stopping point, but that's just going to be another stopping point in between stopping points. And no matter how far down you go, you run into that same problem. So that's what time is for modern science. To each virtual stop of a moving body, we make virtual stops of all other moving bodies. So now looking at objects themselves, when a body stops, we can freeze it at this moment, and what we do to understand it and the things around it is we make virtual stops of all other moving bodies. But the problem with this is that this doesn't show us movement or change. It just counts simultaneities. We've talked about that before, talked about it at the beginning of this video. We're missing We're missing what it is that's fundamental to time, which is temporality, duration, the movement of time. And the proof of this is that if we speed up all of the movements, all the equations of science, of physics, stay the same. We don't have to change any of them, because the actual duration, the time it takes for things to happen, is not a feature of the equations. It's not a feature of the models. Science doesn't take account of those. So we can speed everything up infinitely, and we don't have to. We can speed everything up, and we don't have to change our formulae. They still work in exactly the same way, which of course is a strength, but not if you're trying to understand time, not if you're trying to understand change, not if you're trying to understand the whole. And if we speed up these movements infinitely, what we get is everything being laid out before us at once, which is, of course, space. So time ultimately, in terms of science, is reduced to a spatial way of thinking, is spatialized. So the time important for physics is, and just kind of reinforcing this, is the number of units. So counting, measuring is the goal, not the units themselves. And so the problem with this is that for conscious beings, however, it is the units that matter, for we do not count extremities of intervals. We feel and live the intervals themselves. And this is exactly what we saw at the start of today's video, right? Science only sees the stopping places, not the movements in between. But those movements in between are precisely the things that we live. They're the things that we experience. So if you cut those out, you're cutting out human life, human experience, which means obviously you're not going to get a picture of the whole. And at any rate, the mistake of both ancient science and modern science is that they both handle signs rather than the objects themselves. So, which is to say that both are cinematographical. They spatialize. They think in terms of space rather than in terms of time. And even when modern science brings in time, makes it the centerpiece. Everything's related to each other. Everything's related to everything else in terms of time. The time that we're talking about is actually space. And this brings us to the last part of the video, a question that Bergson raises, but quite a deep and important one, I think, that really goes to the heart of the matter. Although it might seem like a fairly simplistic question, but I think it's quite a deep one. Why is the flow of time absolute for conscious beings? Why do I have to wait for things to happen? Why is everything not given all at once? Why is time absolute for us? Why can we not shortcut it? Why do we have to live in duration? And the answer is something we've already seen: creation. The future is not altogether determined at the present moment, and if the time taken up by this succession is something other than a number, if it has for the consciousness that is installed in it absolute value and reality, it is because there is unceasingly being created in it, not indeed in any such artificially isolated system as a glass of sugared water, but in the concrete whole of which every system forms part, something unforeseeable and new. The duration of the universe must therefore be one with the latitude of creation which can find place in it. So that's a nice quote. I think brings together some fundamental points, drives home some nice insights there. Everything cannot be given at once, or there could be no creativity. And so in that sense, it's not really an argument. He's not making like a logical argument for why time exists. He's instead he's really saying there is genuine creativity. Therefore, there must be duration, and duration is an unfolding of time. Everything cannot be given. If everything's given at once, there's no sense in which there is no unfolding of time, which means that there's no genuine creativity. Another thing that I wanted to point out from that quote: the creation takes place not in the parts, but in the whole. So this kind of gets us to the sense in which the universe endures, in a sense, for Bergson, because taken as a whole, we have this sense of the new continuously unfolding. But if we break parts up, if we break the universe into parts, into abstract, artificial parts, like the glass of sugared water, which we have to wait, in which we have to wait for the sugar to dissolve into the glass, into the water. If we take that artificial system, sugar, glass, water, and treat it as a whole, then there's no duration in that. But that's only because we've broken it off from the whole. There's still duration in the whole, which is to say the universe itself. So there's duration, there's creation in the whole, but not in the parts. And I'm pretty sure I've said this before, the whole applies to organisms, living organisms like ourselves. So there's duration in terms of human life as well. We can be thought of as a totality, as a whole. Our parts, however, don't endure. There's no duration in my finger, for example, but as a part of the whole, part of my body, which is an organic whole, a living organism, then we get creation. Then we get duration and creation, right? And creation as well, creativity. And by the way, it's interesting that the glass of sugared water, that's an example that Bergson trots out in Creative Evolution. Someone said this to me once, and this was before I'd read Bergson and didn't realize, but they were reading Being and Nothingness, and Sartre talks about having to wait for the sugar to dissolve into a glass of water, and he said it's just like it just kind of shocked him. Suddenly Sartre's talking about a glass of sugared water. Where did that come from? And then I read it in here. Now we see, Sartre is again referencing Bergson. I can't remember what he said exactly about what Sartre was saying about that, but yeah, again, it just, I don't know. I rant about it a lot. You already know, but the link between these guys and Bergson is just so undeniable. Yet they denied it. That's the crazy thing. Another thing I wanted to say about this is there's an analogy that Bergson draws between a child with a jigsaw puzzle and an artist. So the kid who knows what the puzzle should finally look like, because the picture's there on the box, when they put the puzzle together, when they put the pieces together, they can complete the puzzle faster and faster depending on their abilities. The only thing that slows them down is the speed of their hands, really, and their coordination. So it can be that the puzzle can be completed faster and faster until it's completed in a heartbeat, because the final result is already there. We already know what the final outcome should be. There's no genuine creativity going on here. It's just a mechanical slotting of pieces of parts into into the whole. But we know what that whole should look like. So the only thing limiting how fast the child can put the jigsaw puzzle together is is the speed at which they move. As compared to the artist, however, who creates a picture by drawing it from the depths of his soul, time is no longer an accessory. It is not an interval that may be lengthened or shortened without the content being altered. The duration of his work is part and parcel of his work. It is a vital process, something like the ripening of an idea. So that's a really nice quote, I think. The reason time's important is because the artist is creating something fundamentally new, something from themselves. They're creating something here. It's unpredictable. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. The artist doesn't know what the outcome's going to be. They have to take parts of their experience or the thing that they've seen or that they're looking at now, put it together in a way that's fundamentally new, and really kind of extract something genuinely novel from themselves. And that action, that process requires duration. It requires time. You can't speed that up. If you speed it up, you change what's going to the result's going to be. The time is an integral part of the creation. And it's interesting that to examine the way that our kind of intuitions on this, we think the future's knowable if we had complete knowledge of the present. Therefore, the interval from the present to the past, to the future, can be lengthened or shortened at will because it's already there. Right? So we think that the future's knowable with the complete knowledge of the present only because succession appears to the intellect as already completed in the past, in terms of spatial sense. So it appears to us, succession, when we think about succession, we think about the past. One moment followed from the last, and it preceded the next. And so we imagine, since succession in the future will become succession in the past, symmetry leads us to think that the future is there already, rolled up, already painted on the canvas. It's a nice little expression that Bergson uses. So we imagine it's already there. If we could speed things up, we could get to the future, that same future, just faster. We could just get there faster. But it's not there already. We have to make it. We have to create it. And that process, genuine creativity, takes time, i.e. takes duration. So yeah, creation is an organic process. That's kind of the idea here. Duration is an organic process. This reminds me actually of something I remember Sam Harris talking about a while ago with AI. He was imagining that once you get an AI, its thinking speed is going to be 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times faster. The numbers get kind of crazy here, but it's going to be so much faster than a human's that it's going to come up with ideas and advances in technology within like 5 minutes that would take us centuries to get to. That to me is crazy. It doesn't make any sense at all. As if it's it's an illusion, I guess, that if you just speed up your thinking, you could discover something that might normally have taken you 10 years, That's just not the way it works. It's not the way discoveries are made. It's not the way progress in any field can happen. These things all require lived experience. It's like locking Galileo up in a room and just fast forwarding his thinking would not have led to any of his later discoveries or inventions any faster, because he didn't get to those discoveries or inventions by just thinking, by just kind of sitting in a room and churning through ideas. He had to experience, he had to live, he had to perform experiments, he had to talk with people, he had to, these ideas, these insights, they require time, they have to be nurtured, they have to grow, in a sense, in a very real sense, organically. So you can't rush them. And the reason that's true is because the future's not laid out, it's not already there, rolled up, already painted on the canvas. We have to make it. And that future, that process requires duration. The last thing I want to finish up with is one last question. How can science make predictions then if the future is fundamentally unpredictable? How is it able to tell us what's going to happen in the future if what we're saying is the future is fundamentally unpredictable? Then the answer is that science carves up the whole into abstract quantifiable parts which are predictable considered on their own. So those artificial abstract portions that we've cleaved reality into, they don't endure. So there is no genuine creativity. There's no duration going on there. So those become amenable to the laws of science, to the predictive powers of science. But that's precisely why you'll never predict human behavior in the same way. Sure, you can guess what's going to happen. You can make informed guesses and you can be right. But you're not making a prediction in the same way that's kind of ironclad, in the same way as if you were predicting something about an artificial system that doesn't endure, that doesn't have that sense of genuine creativity, genuine change, movement behind it. Right, let's hit a summary. So first thing we looked at was science, and we saw that science focuses on fixed static parts, thereby missing the movement which happens in between. Or it focuses on instants, moments in time, missing the duration that takes place in between. Either way, we're focusing on static things, not the organic truth, the organic reality underlying them. The purpose of science is not to explain reality, but to use it. That's a really important insight, I think, that we tend to overlook or not be aware of even in this day and age. Then we looked at philosophy. Essentially, philosophy is concerned with the whole. So we're stepping back. We're not drilling in anymore. We're not analysing. We have to look at the thing as a whole, as part of a whole. And this basically involves thinking in terms of duration, thinking in terms of change, in terms of continuity. And the method behind this we talked about in the last video is intuition. And finally, we looked at modern science versus ancient science. And the essential difference between the two: modern science relates everything back to time, but the time that it relates everything back to, that it understands everything in relation to, is not duration. It's a spatialized time. We're counting simultaneities, not addressing time as it really is, time as duration. And both modern and ancient science was cinematographical in nature. So they both took snapshots and attempted to understand and explain reality by putting those snapshots up next to each other. Although modern science effaces this distinction in the sense that it still talks about time, it mentions time, but the time that it deals with, as I said, is spatial. And that is where I'm going to stop here, science and philosophy. Thanks for listening. I hope that helped a little bit. I'll see you in the next video.